Okay, hello. Good morning. Let's see. So I had a few streams where we made some changes to Impact, and I'm very, very happy that like through the development, like conceptually, it went a little bit back and forth. Um, the idea was to take advantage of what we learned from version 2 of Code Sandbox, where we embraced React using contexts. We saw some benefits of doing that, as opposed to having a global state store, but we also saw the drawbacks. So it's basically taking the observable paradigm that you typically have in global state stores and be able to use that with a React context, which we call a store here. And the question was like how to express this, how to like what observable primitives should we use? Should we just use Mobex? Should we create our own? And then you have React 19 with first class support for promises, with the new use hook, and all of this stuff. And then we kind of put everything together into like a Impact React package where you would both have this kind of it started out as the reactive context, then I started calling it observable context, and I started calling it a store. It's very hard to find the right terminology, but I think store is a good is a good term for it, because it is about state management. Because when you just say observable context or reactive context, it doesn't like hit you. Is it state management or what is it? And context is such an overloaded term. Store is maybe also an overloaded term, but not to the extent that context is. So with this update that we're going to merge later, we have one package which is actually just the store concept, like creating this, like you have this function, you return an object, it's not part of the reconciliation loop, but it is part of the React context, and you can pass it props. And then you have Impact React, which is the like reactive primitives or observable primitives that we created. And then there's also a Mobex where you can use the Mobex observable primitives with the stores. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure how to document this yet. Currently, I focus on Impact React because that is built very much with React in mind to be like a natural stepping stone. It's almost like, what if React introduced observable primitives and an observable context? What would that like look like? And then mention that if you have experience with Mobex, you want to use Mobex, you can still do that, and then avoid having like this single global state tree or single global like app class instance. You can rather nest your state management in React. Yes. So built on React context, provide stores, pass and props, and consume them from any nested component or store. I'm not saying in development. I should have changed this a long time ago. It's not a release candidate. We made pretty huge changes. Not like it's breaking changes, but it's not like conceptual. It's been more of a perspective shift than like a change of concept. It's always been the same concept. So what I thought we could do is just jump in here and just kind of quickly go through some documentation. And then we're going to merge it. And then we're gonna, let's see what we do after that. Anyways, so what I'm happy about now is that now we're kind of moving from like component local state to context, and then we continue from there when we move to the store. And that is because we've removed the like the global store concept from Impact, it doesn't make sense. Like Impact is an abstraction over the React context. And if you want something to be global, you just mount a store at the top of your component tree. That is as much of a global scope as anything else. Anyways, so when the context in React doesn't work for us, we have a tendency to replace it with global state management. With Impact, we rather make the React contexts observable. Is this the latest? I don't think this is the latest. There we go. Oh. Yarn docs dev. There we go. When the React context does not work for us, we have a tendency to replace it with global state management. Doing so definitely solves a friction, but we also leave something behind. With Impact, we rather make the React context observable, gaining the benefits we find in global state management without leaving behind the benefits of the React context. So let us implement the previous React context example with Impact. Blah, blah, blah. And here we have one of the bigger changes, a new signature for Signal, which was done to let you expose the getter of the signal without having to create an actual getter. And the thing is, inside the store, you would always call the value to unwrap it, right? While in a component, you wouldn't do that. And then in a component, you wouldn't really be able to see, okay, what value is being is an unwrapped signal and what is just a value. But now you rather also in the components, you call the signal to unwrap the value, so you see where observation is actually happening in the code. And then you have the separate setter, which you use as normal. And then the other change was to not have this create store provider and then manually set up the use hook or use store hook. Now it's just create store, which gives you the hook and has a provider property to provide that store to the component tree, which is nice. Blah, blah, blah. We are bailed out of the reconciliation loop and rather use observable primitives. We use signal instead of use state to define our state. To create the hook and provider to consume the store, we use the create store function instead of create context. And then components will need the ability to observe what signals are being accessed from a store and be notified when they change. Impact provides observers, where a recent JavaScript feature has enabled a less intrusive way to make components observe. If you prefer a more traditional way, you're free to do so. So that's that. And here we can see that we're actually calling count here. What you will notice with Impact is that consuming observables requires you to call them like the count to get the value. This is for technical reasons primarily, but it also highlights that indeed you're consuming an observable value. And then I just added this tip. We'll see, probably iterate some more, but Impact allows you to combine its stores with other observable primitives like Impact React MobX. The observable primitives from Impact is built to fit with React and its features, but you're free to use any of the other solutions. Blah, blah, blah. So there we have that thing. Oh, before I forget, I'm going to check which version it's 13. Which version are we on now? Impact React. Yeah, so we're going to publish 13. Nice. Blah, 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 nested stores. As Impact builds on the existing React context, you will be able to instantiate state management related to specific pages, blah, blah, blah. I don't think there's like anything new here. Yeah, there's really nothing new here. Signal is the primitive. I think I changed this a little bit. The signal has the same interface as useState. Only you need to unwrap the value. When unwrapping a value in the component, it will automatically observe any changes to that value. It does not matter how many signals are exposed through the store, only the ones accessed in a component will cause that component to reconcile. Just like useState, the value of a signal is considered immutable and needs to strictly change, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I don't think there were actual, it's more like changing the docs so it actually reflects the API. I thought about having another deep dive, which is it's hit my mind as I've been kind of reworking the documentation. Yeah, now I can't remember. Anyways, stores has also been updated, where I just talk about the signal having a getter and a setter, blah blah blah, and props. Yeah, fix the type issue on the core package, so that's working now. Blah blah blah. Yeah, because the challenging thing with documentation is that this documentation is partly the stores and partly the observable primitives of Impact. Well, if you want to use MobX, you kind of have to read this documentation to understand like stores and props and all of that stuff. Hopefully you don't really need to do that. It should feel completely natural. It's like it is the React context. It's just that you use a function that doesn't reconcile, and then you just return what you want. But anyways, I don't think it needs to be like a separate documentation page for like MobX or other observable primitives. Anyways, blah blah blah. Now that we have the session store, blah blah blah. Yeah, this is basically the same. Like, I'm probably gonna iterate the hell out of this stuff, but it's good enough for now. It's really interesting. Yeah, there was this one thing. I've never thought about this before. Like, because one of the kind of principles of Impact React is that it's this privacy thing, that it's almost like you're designing an API, like an actual like REST API. And there are certain things you might have an endpoint that's public, but it has some internal logic that changes something related to another endpoint. Or like changes something in the database or whatever that you don't want to expose directly. And the point is that with state management, you have the same school of thought. It's like your components, like your interface to the components is your public interface. And there's certain things you don't want these components to be able to do. And this has to do with the size of the application and the size of the team and everything. But I was thinking about like how can you create an item that has this public interface of ID and title, but you want to be able to internally update the item. So the updating should only happen internally. So this is an interesting approach to that. Here I create a symbol. I just call it update. And when we create an item, I pass in that symbol. And this symbol is only accessible inside this store. So only this store is able to use this symbol. So I pass that into create item, and then I add that symbol as a property. So it's basically a method where I can pass in an updated item, and then it will update its internal state. So as you can see down here, we're subscribing to items, and I go and grab the item. I call the update method with the new item. That's a very clean way to do it. It's not intuitive at all, I think, to do something like that. But this is what I think about a lot in state management, is that if you're just doing something simple for yourself, if you're the sole developer of something, you don't have to have these protective boundaries in place. It's only important as the complexity of the application, and especially like the number of people like working on the code base. And then how can you like, what mechanisms do we have to create those protective boundaries so things doesn't change where it shouldn't change? Like now it's technically impossible to change these items from anywhere else than inside this store, and that's the whole point. But they still have a public interface. Anyways, then we have queries and mutations. I think I'm maybe like overwhelming people with this low level first class support for promises. I think especially people who are, for example, using React Query for data fetching. And the point is, like, you can still do that. But I know that in certain types of applications, you want like complete control of fetching data. Because like React Query is also like, it's public. Like any component can like go and start fetching some data, and you, as I understand it, you can like split that data across components, where one component might try to refetch it, but it's global. So then it refetches in the other components, not like another refetch, but they will like reconcile and all of this stuff. Yeah, and I wonder if there will be like what was I gonna say? Yeah, I wonder if someone will create abstractions on this. It would be interesting to have store abstractions, like resource store, create resource store. And that would basically be an abstraction over signals and promises, so you can actually use suspense and everything. It could have caching mechanisms as like options, and like you could do all kinds of crazy stuff. But showing all this low level stuff, I don't think necessarily people, like even me, I spent a long time like, I don't even remember when I thought like, I think it was more of a, oh, React is gonna have this new use hook. Oh, they're gonna support using promises, and internally React will add these properties to these promises. And then there was just one line that mentioned like, these promises should be created outside of React, so React doesn't have to populate these promises with these populate these promises with these properties. It should already be there. And the promise itself has to be created outside of React. And then it was like, oh, what if we just make that work in the signals? What would it enable us to do? But it's very low level. That's the point. That is the point. So I think there will be abstractions on top of this, but I don't want it to be necessarily part of the core API. I do see like Vue and Solid, they have these like resource kinds of abstractions. Maybe it does make sense. I don't know. But nothing is preventing us from doing that in the future. Anyways, fetch post, update post. So especially this one is interesting, because here we're exposing a method to update the post. And we already have a post. That's what we're doing here. We are fetching a post where we put a signal to fetch the post. So it's a promise that represents the actual post. It's an asynchronous value, this post. So we go and first we go and grab the signal where we have the post and the ability to set the post. and then we wait for the current post because it's a promise. It needs to wait for it to get the actual post. And then we run the request to update the post, because what we want to do here, which is also like a new thing, like when the value is asynchronous, you can also create these natural, like, because this is also tricky, right? If you allow updating a post, like you don't really control how many times that is being done. So you can get into these situations where you're overriding, like it's not naturally queuing updating the post, right? So but what we can do when it is an asynchronous value is that we can attach the process of updating the server with the value itself. So what's happening here is we wait for the current post, and then we create a promise that goes and updates the post. And then when we set the new post, we actually first add the promise of updating the post. And only when that is done, we update the current post with the update, and then if something goes wrong, we just keep the current post. And then we return the actual promise of updating the post so that some error handling can be done from at the call site, wherever this update post was called. And that's interesting, because then if you call update post again, this line will just take more time because it's updating the post. But what I'm realizing talking through this now is that we're putting the post in a pending state. Which maybe is fine. No, that's probably not fine. Because what will happen? Yeah, this doesn't work. Yeah, and this is my point. It's like there is this new capability, but how to apply patterns on top of it isn't obvious. This hasn't really been done before. Because what will happen now is that when we go and fetch the post, we'll go back into loading when we update it, which is not what we want, right? But this has been a thing that's been bothering me for so long. It's when you have these asynchronous like updates, you want to queue them, so that people can't just like call update post many times in a row, and you get race conditions and stuff. And I was hoping that maybe there could be a pattern with these signals where you can deal with that. But definitely you don't want this to go into a pending state. Yeah. Yeah, because what happens now is that we would await. What would we do? Let's look at this. I want to talk through this because this is something I really want to find a better way to do. Let's see. Fetch. Where are we? There we are. So what you really would do here is you would return this. Let's see. Oh, sorry. Wait a minute. Oh my god. So what we do is, and only if it's actually okay, we say set post. But if it fails, we don't update it. And it will just throw to the call site that called update post, which is exactly what we want. Oh, sorry. So this needs to be promise of result. The problem now is that now you could technically very quickly call update post, and then one of them would like resolve or get a response, and it would update the current post with update. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe that's how it's actually solved, the queuing. I haven't thought about that, because you also have a current one. Yeah. We don't actually need this. Wait a minute. This is interesting. So given that we actually wanted to optimistically update it, okay, let's do that. Let's do an optimistic update. So what we're going to do is we're going to set post. Well, that's also a problem, like reverting. Okay, let's just talk through this, because this is one of the more difficult things. And again, like you can get this out of the box with certain solutions. But I want like a low level way of just thinking intuitively about this. And this is the thing, async state management. If you really like want to avoid race conditions and all of this stuff, OMG, there's so many pitfalls. Anyways, so we want to do optimistic. We want to do optimistic, and we want to revert. So we have a catch here. We want to revert, and then we want to throw the error so that the call site, as I mentioned, is able to handle it. So current here is a promise, so we can say current wait, sorry, this is async. We can do better. Try catch. So we not actually want to return anything here. So we just want to await API put post. And then after that, we want to set post. And here we want to revert and then throw the error. Sorry about that. So what we can do here, we can also make this async. Since this is should return a promise, we can say, oh, this was going to be optimistic, right? We want to do it optimistically. Oh, sorry, like that. So I think what we can do here is do this. Okay, let's just write it down. Sorry, post await current. And then we're going to return post with update. So since this is signal with the promise, we await to get the current thing, and then we return it. I think the thing that's like makes this so unintuitive having async values is because sometimes, like now, after we fetch the initial post, like when this is done, it will always be a resolved promise. We never go like and fetch it again. Like we could do that if we want to do it, and that's interesting in and of itself. It's like what kind of UX do you want when you refetch the post? I guess you don't want to go into a pending state. You want like this background fetching of the post. Yeah, it's I just know in my stomach that it's a good thing to have an observable promise. It makes a shit ton of sense. But maybe it's too low level to intuitively use it. That's kind of what I'm reflecting on. So if it had like an abstraction that used the observable promise under the hood, then it would make much more sense. So you wouldn't even say signal. You would say, I don't know. If it's data, like that's the thing. Like not all asynchronous state management is data fetching, and data fetching has a lot of complicated factors to it that you don't have, for example, with a barrier. Like a barrier is just a promise that you control its resolved and rejected state, and then you can like set a new barrier. So you can like await that promise in one section of your code, and then you can manually resolve that promise in a different section. So for example, a model could be a barrier where you set the barrier which shows the model, and then your code is waiting for the result of that promise, which is basically your component resolving the promise with a value. Like you can do all kinds of neat stuff. But data fetching has all this like refetch, it has optimistic, revert, caching, all of this stuff. And I was kind of hoping that these things would be easier to do, having this observable promise. But maybe this observable promise is more about how you just refetch. It's like refetch is different from, well, yeah, that's the thing. So imagine having I don't know what we're going to call it, data. Let's just call it data. So what you would do is you would, again, fetch post maybe. But what you would get here is some different things. You would rather get, it's basically the React query thing. Maybe you can even call it fetch. You would have the promise. So the promise of the data, which is always like, that's an observable promise. You can consume it in a component, use suspense, or you can look at its status, which is a really good way to handle that. But then you would have like refetch, and you would have like options for caching and invalidation and Yeah, I'm not sure. Like this is something, again, this is a higher abstraction. I'm just reflecting like should I even document this low level stuff? Because I'm not sure if people would actually use it. Hmm. Okay, I think we're gonna do another stream on another stream on just 2 seconds. Um, sorry. You know what? You have to excuse me. Let's just run through this. So, okay, I want to do optimistic, and I have this asynchronous post. And normally the way we would do this, we would separate data fetching from state, right? But the point then is that you don't know that state can't just be the value you're fetching, because you don't know if you have it or not. Like, does it have an error? Is it pending? Like, it needs to have those states as well. So why not just make the promise itself that state? That makes a lot of sense to me. If any state is asynchronous because it needs to be fetched from the server or whatever, it is a promise with the state. It just is a promise. It's an async value. It's async state. But then, as I said, there are different kinds of asynchronous values. They represent different things. They can represent data fetching or data from the server, which has this whole world of refetch and caching and all of that stuff. And then you have barriers. You have mutations, which is different from data fetching. But yeah, anyway, so if we were going to set the post optimistically, we would have to do something like this. And then we would await putting the post. And then if we throw an error, the question now is, how do we revert this? Like, properly, safely revert this? Because what could happen is that you just quickly do update post with 2 different updates. And if we were to we would have to know the prev post or current post would have to be await post. Like, we would have to do it like this. But then current post is the version of the post that is before this thing runs. So what if this first call to update post fails? But the other one is a success. The point is that you just don't want to, you want to queue them. You want to handle one at a time. That's the whole point. But you can't like naturally do that by just without having an actual queue. And that's like, I don't know why I don't want. That's why I like the idea that this promise also includes the change to the, in this case, the post, because then you can safely just await the signal, because you're making an operation on that asynchronous value. So you make that part of the signal, but then the signal becomes pending during that operation. And that's not something you want, right? Because then your UI suddenly moves you into a pending state. It's almost like it would be nice if there was another status. So now you have your pending, you have fulfilled, and you have rejected. It would be nice if there was like an updating status as well. So the promise was previously resolved. Because that's the thing about a promise is like in and of itself, a single instantiated promise can only be pending, fulfilled, or rejected. But a value can be represented by multiple promises, right? A signal can have multiple promises in time, but it represents the same value. So the initial promise, yes, is pending, like there isn't any value there yet, but then it might be updating, where you still have an existing value, right? But you're also waiting for something new. That's the thing that's missing here. But I don't want to go beyond the use. That would have been interesting. Like if the use specification of React actually supported, maybe I should have my microphone like this. The use specification of React actually supported having that additional status. Yeah. Oh my God. It's very interesting because a mutation, it makes a shit ton of sense. A mutation can just be a signal. You just shove a promise in there, and now we can observe that mutation from declaratively from a component. It's super simple. But data fetching is like, it's a beast. It's a freaking beast. Nice. You know, I'm gonna. Sorry, I got stuck in this. I wasn't supposed to. I was supposed to show you the Mobex stuff and do the merge. But I got stuck. It happens. You know what? I'm just gonna stop here. I'm gonna reflect on this because I really want people to understand the power of having observable promises, because it's so nice to consume those from a component, and being able to choose between just looking at the status property and just consuming the promise as is, or using it with suspense, or using it with traditional await inside the stores. Like it's a really good primitive. But but you typically think of data fetching with promises, and I really want to deliver on that, so people understand what an underlying powerful primitive it is. Yes. So I'm gonna do a little bit of research, and then I think we're actually gonna at least consider adding a primitive, an abstraction over signal, which represents data fetching. As I said, we don't need a data fetching primitive for mutations, because that can just be a signal. Oh, it should be okay. You know what? We're gonna dive into that right now. Just 2 seconds. Okay, so a much more fun discussion is what would it look like if we were gonna add a new primitive TypeScript. So we're gonna have, so I have my store here, and in this store we're gonna fetch some data. Let's call it, yeah, what's this gonna look like? Let's just do this, and we're gonna call it query. So we can have query and mutation. My query, my mutation. So this query requires you to actually call. That's the first question. Like, should you be able to define a query without actually fetching the data? I guess you do. Or we're gonna steal from React Query here. Oh my god. Is there like a... Yeah, because it's interesting. Like, you require these query keys and stuff, and you don't need that here. You can just and then you have query function and get to do's, and get to do's is just, yeah, my API something. So let's say you want to, what does it actually return? Query.data. This is what I don't like, that you have this data that might be there or not. This is the great thing. This would actually be the promise. And you would be able to check its status to see if it's pending, if it's rejected, if it's resolved, and go grab the value. That's a really nice invalidate. Oh, invalidate and refetch. I wonder this refetch thing. But this is also interesting because here you could say query.invalidate. Anyways, so let's say this is what can I have, like query key to do's? Oh, I guess you will be able to say something like ID string. Let's say you have an API here, create API. Posts. Yeah, add post. That will be API get posts. Okay, let's ignore the arguments for now. So you have these posts. Let's call it posts query and post mutation. Return. So what we're able to do now is actually just say posts and posts query dot data, and data would actually be the promise. So you, yeah, and I guess that's why it can be undefined. It's like you might not be fetching it yet. But I guess that's what you could do with like a callback, is either you just immediately fetch it. So if you give query a promise, you immediately fetch it and data can never be undefined. But if you give it a callback, it means it's lazily fetched, which means data can be undefined because you haven't called fetch yet, which is fine. It's still just a promise. It's a signal that can be undefined or a promise of whatever this query represents. That makes sense to me. But then, okay, so let's do more. Lazy posts query, and then posts query. Lazy posts, and then posts is posts query.data. Okay, and then okay, so we want to allow you to fetch lazy posts. So that will be lazy posts query.fetch, I guess. While the post query, you wouldn't fetch that again. How do they do it here? Do they like... Does it actually fetch it? Oh, maybe I should just learn about this first. Oh, sorry that this is so small. I just wonder if, do they have, is it lazy or eager? Occurs at blah blah blah. Unique key query can be used with promise-based method data from server. If your method model around it, I'm using data to subscribe to query and use query. Results there throws an error. The unique key provides determinant for refetching, caching, and sharing a query throughout your application. A query result returned by user can... Just the fact that you're using strings here, it just that like it breaks the deal for me. I'm very adamant about and also the TypeScript of this, like is pending, is error, is success. You can't use TypeScript with that. You can do it with status, but then the actual result of status needs to be like a union. It probably is. And to check for that is and then finalizing the data render. Yeah, exactly. But this is not typed, right? Yeah, and this isn't typed either. This pisses me off as a TypeScript developer. It's like you should have these two can't be separate. You have to have state.status, and then you check if it's pending. Then you're done doing that check, and then you do state.status. Now it can either be error or it can be resolved. So if you return that on error, you have state.error, right? This makes absolutely no sense to me. Sorry, I'm not dissing. This has been like a incredibly valuable tool for a lot of people. So I don't mean to like diss the library, but it's not doing proper unions in TypeScript. For some reason, that just pisses me off. Oh, this is interesting. Why two different states? Background refetches and stale while revalidate logic with all combinations of status and fetch status possible. For example, a query in success status will usually be in idle fetch status, but it could also be in fetching. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was talking about with the refetch. It's like initially you want your promise to be in a pending state, but you don't want to be in a pending state during refetch, right? But that's interesting that maybe that's something you want to know in the UI, which you wouldn't know here. Like if you have posts and then you do a refetch on the posts, you wouldn't be able to get that information from the data because it's just a promise. But it's interesting, the point that is two different states, like, because it could be rejected. Like, let's imagine you would have pending, fulfilled, rejected, and then you would add like something, refetching, whatever. You wouldn't know which state it's refetching from. Was it refetching from a rejected state or a fulfilled state? So then you wouldn't be able to show the correct UI. So it's almost like you need explicit data fetching state. Ah, this is so interesting. Yeah, no, you know what? I think I'm just gonna reflect on this. I'm not sure. Because it's like, if you want to create a barrier, for example, also seeing suggestions on observable streams that you can make them promises. Because it starts out as a pending promise, and then when it receives its first value, it becomes resolved. Then as the next values come in, it just updates it as a resolved promise. And now you have like a fully observable stream declaratively in your component with the use hook, or just looking at the promise. It's the end result is really, really good, but it doesn't seem to be good until you add that abstraction on top of it. Yeah. Okay. I'm stagnating here. Let's just stop the stream. I'm gonna do some reflecting, and then we'll see where this thing ends up.